shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
So, we sit in a grand tradition in this congregation of interviewing people of various walks and ilks and experiences. So we get to ask you the questions that you usually ask other people. So, of course, the first question that we need to ask you is, where did you most significantly see the face of God in your time away?
The reality is, I did push people away. I did create much space. And in creating much space, it was pretty easy to see and hear God very regularly. But there was one place in particular that God was incredibly apparent to me. The Camino is marked with yellow, pointy arrows. Now, sometimes they're really fancy in sidewalks and they're made out of metal or whatever. The arrows can look like many things, but as often as not, those arrows are something that people have done with spray paint. Yellow, pointy rocks. There are pointy arrows pointing the way. Now, the thing about those arrows that for me was the most significant face of God, the arrows reminded me that I was headed the right direction, I was not lost, and I was not alone. Now, there were times that I missed the arrows. There were times I had to look hard for the arrows. There were times that there were clusters of arrows, which is also very much like the face of God. There are times we miss it. And there are times that we're so busy looking up that we don't look down, and that's where it appears. But it's there. It's there whether we notice it or not. And for me, those arrows, day by day, kilometer by kilometer, were the face of God, pointing, reassuring, encouraging.
Was there a time in this journey when you were the face of God for someone else?
Yes. If you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. One of my rules, I didn't have many rules, but I did have a rule, and one of the rules was I was not going to be a pastor on the Camino. Incognito. And that was easy later on. Later on, I learned how to say, I'm a peregrino, pilgrim, and they would say, but what do you do the rest of the time? I'm a peregrino, and I could do that. But early on, I didn't know how to do that. And so the very first night, we've come to the place we're going to stay. We're waiting for check-in, and as those of you who know Yost and Sarah from the movie, that's who's sitting around talking. And it comes up, what do you do? And of course, I outed myself. I'm a pastor. Well, as it turns out, Yost was on a pilgrimage looking for God. And Yost and I spent about 4 days walking together and talking, face of God. And about day 2, Yost starts saying, well, the face of God is everywhere. And so I know that our conversations allowed him to experience God and see God in very profound ways. And it was absolutely against what I thought I was going to do, which was be a pastor out there.
Yeah, we can be many things, but we're also at the same time pastors, aren't we?
We are.
Yeah. And somehow they always figure it out.
They do.
So this is a two-sided coin to the next question, and you can figure out what the two sides are. What was the high point for you?
High point. I'm going to answer twice because 2 significant things happened. I went on sabbatical, and in the midst of sabbatical, I walked the Camino. So those are 2 really different things. High point on the Camino was when I came to the sign that said Santiago, 100 kilometers. So at that point, I had walked 700 kilometers. And it was gravy. I could crawl 100 kilometers. Hitting the halfway mark was a huge psychological, I had no idea how big that was going to be psychologically. I really didn't pay attention to the numbers until I was about halfway. That was big. The 100-kilometer, that was huge. High point of the Camino. High point of sabbatical, this is really silly, but there's a context to it. Riding the donkey. In Greece, they have these really steep ports, and I'd been watching the donkeys and seeing the donkeys and hearing the bells, and I just loved that. But I figured it was like really, really uber expensive, and when I found out it was €5, €5. I got on the donkey, and the donkey and I had such a great time. And when the donkey took a pause, of course I didn't know Donkey's name, so I called Donkey Donkey all the way up. And when Donkey took a pause, I assured Donkey it was okay, that Donkey probably had a long day. Other people were freaking out riding the donkeys, and that to me was just delightful, goofy, wonderful.
High points are high points, right? Yeah.
Riding the donkey, yeah.
Was that Santorini?
Santorini.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever have a chance to go anywhere in the world, put Santorini on your list. It's one of the most gorgeous places on earth, right?
It is. It is.
So the low point? What about the low point? What was hard?
Again, I've got two answers.
Mm-hmm.
On the Camino, the low point was 2 days out of Santiago. I walked from Saint Jean to Santiago. That's the 500 kilometers. And then I walked the next 3 days out to the ocean, out to Finisterre. And after leaving Santiago, it was really hard for me to remember why I was still walking. I was tired. It was 33, 34 days into it. I was really kind of done. Day 2 out of Santiago was a long day, 30-some kilometers. It was wet. It was miserable. It was foggy. And we got lost. The signage was not as good out of Santiago. And apparently, as we came to find out later on, a farmer didn't want them walking on his land anymore, so it had been rerouted. But there was still signage pointing. And walking alone, but there were people ahead of me. But what we did is we came to this place, and the sign was knocked over at a T. So do we go this way or do we go this way? So people start backing up because we're coming into each other going, what do we do? So we tried this way for a couple kilometers, and there was no signage, so we came back. And we went the other way, and when we went the other way, there was a sign pointing back. And then people started, it ended up being 10 people bumping into each other because we were all lost. There was a blessing in it, even though it was a low point. Tired, cold, wet, we're in the middle of nowhere. But 10 brains are going, should we try this? Should we try this? They're pulling out their guidebooks, trying to figure out what it is, trying to do phones, nothing worked. And the blessing in it was, they did what I wouldn't have done left to my own devices. They went back.
Ah.
And that's not what I would have done left to my own devices. And we went back about 3 kilometers, and when coming down the hill, we could see the signage that we couldn't see the way we'd come. So it was a miserable day. Miserable being lost. You're so vulnerable and tired anyway, and then wandering around in circles, kilometers. Kilometers don't sound like much until you've already done 30 of them. Mm-hmm. That was a rough day.
So it's almost a parable in that, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There were 2 other really hard days. The first was really early on. I started out with my daughters. And we spent about 6 days together in Ireland, and we spent the last night together in the Dublin airport. And the next morning we went different directions. And watching my daughters walk away in the airport was really, really hard. I was excited for them. We were all going different directions. They were all doing what they wanted to do, but we were all going different directions, and it was going to be a really long time before we came together again. And of course, there's the other really hard day. I had not been in phone contact with home. You know about the blog, there was some texting, but the morning I woke up and my phone said, call home, call home. Before I called, I knew it. It's hard news. And so I got the information that my dad had died, and it was a miserable day. I was on the bus and I wanted to shout, or the restaurant, and say, my world shifted today. And there was no place for me to say that until that night when I could blog and tell you about my world shifting. And you made hits on the blog and hugged me right back. The hardest day.
It's one of the things we did not announce at the beginning of the service, that Les's memorial service will be this Saturday at 11 o'clock here at the church. Okay, so one more question, Pastor,
yes,
my friend. We go back a long way. Did you know that? She was on my call committee at Christ Lutheran Church. It was then Christ Lutheran Church. So I've known Emily since she was 18 months old. That's all I'm going to say, Emily. Where did God most work on you on this pilgrimage?
Last January, first of a new year, that's when my birthday is in January. So Januaries are kind of always bumpy for me, trying to figure out what did it mean and what does the next year mean. And last January, as I wrestled with all that stuff, it became apparent to me that my word or my theme for the year was going to be trust. As we got closer to sabbatical and all of a sudden this wild idea became very real, trust took on a whole new dimension, because the other side of trust is vulnerability. Yeah. And the closer I got to leaving my family and leaving a call and a place that I love, and knowing that everything I was going to have was going to be on my backpack, that vulnerability became huge. Trust, vulnerability. But there's another piece of this too. What I experienced on the Camino wasn't a vision with angels coming up and down a ladder, and I didn't hear voices other than the voices I normally hear. None of that happened for me. But what did happen for me is I experienced God's grace in even more profound ways, because I was so vulnerable and bare out there. So do I have a brand new understanding of God? No. But I have a deeper understanding of God's grace and God's mercy. And out of that, a profound gratitude.
Anything else you want to say?
The gratitude. I understand. I had the opportunity of a lifetime. And I got that opportunity because of my family's support and your encouragement, and you enabled that. And I am so deeply grateful. And I thank you for all that you did in my absence, for allowing me to be absent, and for welcoming me home again. It is a blessing, and you are a blessing, and I am very thankful. And that is all.
Okay. This, by the way, is gin. So if you ever get asked to
This is light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This is light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This is light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Every day, every day, every day, every day, every day, I let my little light shine. Oh, Jesus gave me light, I'm gonna let it shine.